Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
There was a gamer named Josh who was obsessed with finding the creepiest, most obscure horror games online. One night, he stumbled across an old, forgotten title called The Silent Play. It wasn't listed on any mainstream platforms, but a user on a dark forum claimed it was too disturbing to be released to the public. The game was nearly impossible to find, but after a lot of digging, Josh managed to download a cracked copy from an unknown website. The description was vague: a game where the rules are not what they seem, and neither are you. The game booted up with a grainy, outdated intro sequence, flashing through eerie images, decaying trees, abandoned homes, and a figure standing still in the distance, just barely visible. There was no music, just silence. Josh thought it was a little unsettling, but didn't think much of it. As he clicked through to start the game, his screen flickered, almost as if the game itself was fighting back against his attempts to begin. The first few minutes of gameplay were typical. He wandered through a dark forest, picking up items and solving minor puzzles, but then the game started to feel different, unnervingly so. The environment around him would shift, like it was subtly rearranging itself. Paths he'd already walked would no longer be there, and trees would change their positions. The sound was distorted, sometimes sounding like voices whispering in the distance, but it was hard to tell if they were coming from the game or from outside his headphones. Josh pressed on, thinking this was just a poorly made indie game trying to create tension. Then he reached a small, dilapidated house. The door was ajar, and as he entered, his screen flickered again. The house was empty, except for a single chair in the center of the room, facing away from him. He moved closer, and the chair creaked. The screen glitched again, and suddenly, a message appeared in bold red text. "I see you." Josh felt his skin crawl. It was a message that had never appeared in the game before. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, but he chalked it up to a creepy bug in the game's code. He turned the character around, but what he saw made him freeze in place. There, standing in front of the chair, was a figure, no face, just a silhouette, standing unnaturally still. The figure didn't move, but the game's audio began to distort violently, almost as if the sounds were being stretched too far. Josh instinctively reached for the mouse to close the game, but when he clicked, the game refused to minimize. It wouldn't let him quit. The figure in the game slowly started to turn, revealing a face. No, it wasn't a face. It was a distortion, like someone had taken a human face and twisted it into something wrong. Its eyes were too wide, the mouth too open. Josh's heart raced. The screen flickered again, and he heard what sounded like breathing, slow, deliberate, coming from his headphones. But it wasn't just the game. He turned around quickly, but there was nothing behind him. He glanced at his computer's webcam, which he had forgotten was on, but it was still just a blank reflection of the dark room. Josh moved the character out of the house, hoping for some relief, but the screen flashed another message: "You can't leave." Panic set in. The game's soundtrack shifted from eerie whispers to high-pitched, maddening screeches. Then the house appeared again. This time, there was no door, just an empty, endless space. Josh tried to turn off his computer, but it wouldn't respond. The figure reappeared on the screen, now closer. Its distorted face filled the monitor, eyes staring directly at Josh, and it said something. Not through the game's audio, but through his own speakers, clear as day. "I'm in here with you." Frozen with fear, Josh's body went cold. His screen flickered once more, and when it cleared, his character was no longer in the game. The entire display was now filled with a dark, hollow void, except for a single red message in the center: "You invited me in." Terrified, Josh grabbed his phone to try and find a way to fix the problem. As he reached for it, he noticed something strange. His webcam light was on, even though the computer was supposed to be off. He hesitated for a second, but then quickly unplugged it. He never played The Silent Play again, but things didn't go back to normal. Late at night, Josh would hear scratching sounds on his walls, sometimes faint whispers like someone was just behind him, speaking his name. And every time he checked his webcam, the light was always on, flickering just before it went dark. But the worst part? The messages started appearing on his screen again, even when the computer was turned off. "I'm still here. You'll never leave."
Story number 2.
A woman named Sarah had recently moved into an old apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't anything extravagant, but the price was right and it had a certain charm to it. The apartment was on the top floor, and from her windows, she had a beautiful view of the city. Everything seemed normal, at least at first. On the second night after moving in, she noticed something strange. Around midnight, she began hearing a faint tapping noise from above her apartment. It wasn't a rhythmic sound, more like a random series of knocks, soft at first, then louder and more persistent. At first, she thought it might be an old pipe or the wind, but it wasn't consistent with either of those. The next evening, the noise started again, but this time, Sarah decided to investigate. She went up to the roof of the building, wondering if something was causing the sound, maybe a loose vent or part of the structure shifting. As she climbed the narrow staircase, the tapping grew louder with each step. When she reached the top, she pushed open the door to the roof and found nothing. No equipment, no loose debris, just an empty rooftop. Confused but relieved, she returned to her apartment. The noise, however, continued. Now it wasn't just at night. She began hearing it throughout the day, sporadic tapping, almost like someone was trying to get her attention. On the third night, Sarah had enough. She called her landlord, who was a strange, reclusive man who always seemed to be in a hurry. He explained that there had been no one living above her for years. The apartment had been vacant for a long time. He seemed uncomfortable when she mentioned the noises, but assured her it was probably just a settling building. After the call, Sarah stayed up late that night, hoping to catch the source of the noise. As the clock struck midnight, the tapping began again, but this time it sounded different. It was louder, more deliberate. She grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the ceiling, hoping to find something, anything that would explain the strange occurrences. Then suddenly, the tapping stopped. But as soon as it did, a new sound began, a scraping noise coming from inside the walls. It was slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. It started on the far side of the wall and slowly moved toward her, almost like whatever was making the sound was creeping closer. She backed away from the wall, her heart pounding. The scraping intensified until it was almost unbearable. Then everything stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She felt an overwhelming urge to leave the apartment, but something kept her rooted to the spot. The next day, she decided to leave for the weekend, hoping the noises would stop. When she returned on Sunday evening, everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The door to her bedroom was ajar, even though she was sure she had locked it before leaving. She went inside, but as she crossed the threshold, her eyes immediately landed on the small closet by the wall. The door was cracked open, and just beneath the crack, the same scraping noise from before started again, faint but unmistakable. Terrified, Sarah threw open the closet door, expecting to find some sort of animal or perhaps a malfunctioning appliance. Instead, she found an old, dusty mirror leaning against the wall. At first, it seemed like just an old mirror, nothing unusual, but as she stepped closer, she noticed something even stranger. A faint outline of a face could be seen in the reflection, but when she looked behind her, no one was there. Her breath caught in her throat. The face in the mirror began to smile, a wide, grotesque grin that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Sarah backed away slowly, but her body wouldn't let her turn away from the mirror. The face in the glass continued to watch her, grinning wider with every passing second. That night, Sarah packed up her things and left the apartment. She never returned to that building, no matter how many calls or emails she received from the landlord. The last thing Sarah heard was the sound of something tapping against her window, the same strange, unsettling rhythm, as if whatever had been in that apartment was still trying to reach her. And she knew that some things, once they attach themselves to you, don't ever really leave.
Story number 3.
A man named Ben had always been a fan of hiking in the woods. He loved the quiet isolation, the fresh air, and the feeling of being far from the distractions of everyday life. One weekend, he decided to explore a more remote trail deep in the forest, one that wasn't listed on any maps. He had heard rumors about it from other hikers, Stories of strange happenings and unsettling disappearances, but Ben had always brushed them off as mere superstition. As he set off on the trail, everything seemed normal. The sun was shining and the birds were chirping in the trees. But as the hours passed, the forest began to feel different, darker somehow. The shadows between the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally, and Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It was like the forest itself had come alive. Around midday, he came across an old weathered sign that had been half hidden by overgrown vines. The faded text read, "Turn back or you'll never leave." Ben laughed it off, thinking it was just a prank left by other hikers, but the strange feeling continued to gnaw at him. The air felt heavier, colder, and the silence was unsettling. No birds, no wind, just dead quiet. As he continued along the trail, he noticed something odd. The trees around him started to look wrong. Their bark was blackened as if scorched by fire, and the leaves rustled, but there was no breeze. It felt like the forest was closing in on him, pressing in from all sides. Ben tried to brush off the discomfort, but when he reached a clearing, he saw something that made his heart stop. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone well, covered in moss and vines. It looked out of place, as if it had been there for centuries. Without thinking, Ben approached it. As he peered over the edge, he felt an overwhelming urge to look deeper. It was almost as if something was pulling him in, whispering to him from the dark depths of the well. He stepped closer, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Suddenly, he heard a low, guttural voice behind him. "Don't look into it." Ben whipped around, his heart racing, but there was no one there. The voice came again, louder this time. "You shouldn't have come here." Panicked, Ben spun in every direction, but the forest was still empty. The only sound was his own breath and the distant rustling of trees. He turned back to the well and saw, for just a split second, a shadow move beneath the surface. A figure, tall and thin, its limbs twisted and unnatural. Ben backed away from the well, his chest tightening. He turned to leave, but the moment he did, the voice came again, this time right behind him. "Leave before it's too late." Ben sprinted back down the trail, his mind racing. But the path seemed to stretch on forever. The forest around him was no longer familiar. Every turn, every tree looked the same. The trail had changed, as if it had shifted while he wasn't looking. Panic set in. He was lost. No matter how far he ran, the forest didn't seem to end. The trees closed in, their gnarled branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The whispers in the wind grew louder, and with every step, the shadows deepened. It felt like the forest was alive, bending and twisting around him, trapping him in a never-ending maze. By the time night fell, Ben was exhausted. His legs ached and his vision blurred from the lack of sleep. He collapsed against a tree, shivering from both fear and cold. The woods were silent now, but the silence was worse than any noise. It felt suffocating. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. He turned, but there was no one there, just the same dark, empty forest. But the footsteps kept getting closer. Each step grew louder, closer, until Ben felt a breath on the back of his neck. He spun around, but nothing was there. And then he saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the trees, watching him. The figure was tall, unnaturally thin, its face obscured by a hood, but its eyes, those eyes glowed faintly in the dark, hollow and black, like endless voids. The creature's limbs were unnaturally long, like they were stretching out of proportion, and as it took a step forward, its body seemed to bend in ways that no human body should. Ben tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. His legs refused to move. The creature stepped closer, its face still hidden, but its eyes locked onto his, pulling him in, draining the strength from his body. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Ben turned and ran. The forest shifted around him, the trees closing in tighter and tighter, the path narrowing until it was almost impossible to navigate. Every time he thought he saw the edge of the woods, the horizon would shift, and he was back in the heart of the forest again. By the time dawn broke, Ben was no longer running. He was walking, stumbling through the forest, unable to find his way out. His mind felt foggy, his body heavy, like he was being weighed down by something he couldn't see. He kept hearing the creature's footsteps behind him, always there, never stopping. No matter how much he ran, it was always there. And then, When he thought he couldn't take it any longer, he saw a clearing ahead. The sunlight shone through the trees, and for the first time in hours, he thought he saw the edge of the forest. He ran toward it with all his strength, but when he stepped into the clearing, the creature appeared in front of him. Its face was no longer hidden, and what he saw was something he could never forget. It wasn't human. It was something far older, something that had existed long before man ever walked the earth. Its face was an empty mask, hollow and twisted, and it spoke one final word before everything went black. Too late. Ben was never seen again, and the forest remained unchanged. Those who venture into the woods report hearing footsteps behind them, whispers in the air, and a shadow in the corner of their vision. No one knows what happened to Ben, but some say the forest never lets go of those who enter, and it waits for the next lost soul to wander into its depths.